What if I told you that right now, this very moment your future is already spent? Not theoretically, not symbolically, but literally spent. The money you will earn years from now has already been borrowed, circulated, and consumed. Your children's future productivity already accounted for. Even the unborn generations who will inherit the world decades after you, you're gone. Those people already have their economic value pledged as collateral. This system doesn't appear in political speeches, public schooling, or national celebrations. It exists quietly, behind the curtain, holding up the modern world with invisible beams made of debt, trust, and silence. And the most astonishing part is that this system wasn't created for stability, fairness, or prosperity. It was born from desperation, and centuries ago, during a period so chaotic that governments were willing to rewrite the meaning of money itself. To see how governments monetize your future without your awareness, we must step back into early 18th century Europe, when kingdoms were bankrupting themselves through ceaseless wars. Gold was disappearing faster than armies could march. Monarchs were running out of metal and out of options. Armies, ships, and empires couldn't be funded through old methods. Taxation wasn't enough. Borrowing from wealthy families wasn't enough. Something had to change. Into this chaos stepped a Scottish economist named John Law, who challenged the centuries-old idea that money must be tied to precious metals. He argued that money could be credit, backed not by gold, but by the productive capacity of a nation. Britain, desperate for resources, took the idea seriously. In 1694, the Bank of England was established and granted an extraordinary power. It could lend money to the government in amounts entirely detached from physical metal, and the government would repay the loans through the taxes of future citizens. This was the first major instance of a nation turning future wealth into present spending. The government received instant funding. The bank gained influence and profit. The public inherited the obligation. What began as an experiment evolved into a permanent policy tool. The deeper governments dug into the well of future money, the more thrilling the possibilities became. Wars that once required years of saving could now be launched instantly. Infrastructure that once demanded decades of tax collection could now be built with a signature. Entire national agendas could be financed with the stroke of a pen. Citizens were sold government bonds under the patriotic promise of helping their nation grow. Unaware that these instruments also helped normalize perpetual debt, as industrial revolutions swept through the world, central banks acquired even more authority, the ability to issue currency, regulate credit, manipulate interest rates, and create liquidity at will. What most people didn't understand was that central banks also gained power over time itself. They learned to convert decades of future labor into instant financial resources. For a while, the gold standard held the system in check. Governments could only spend as much as their gold reserves allowed. But global conflicts, especially the two world wars, shattered this restraint. Countries needed more money than their gold allowed. They printed aggressively, undermining the standard, until it became unworkable. After decades of strain, the world finally reached a breaking point. In 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. Overnight, the world's financial foundation shifted from physical backing to pure credit. Money became entirely conceptual. Debt became the engine of money creation. Governments realized they now had access to something unprecedented: unlimited borrowing. No ceiling, no anchor, no real limit beyond public tolerance. The results were immediate and dramatic. Government borrowing exploded. Spending expanded. Political promises multiplied. Public expectations grew. Financial markets became addicted to new waves of liquidity. And silently, without debate or democratic consent, the global economy crossed from an era of money backed by gold into an era of money backed by promises your promises. Future workers' promises and the promises of people who do not yet exist. The consequences became clear over the decades. In 1971, the U.S. national debt was under $400 billion. Today it exceeds $35 trillion. Worldwide, total debt is more than $315 trillion, 3.5 times global GDP. This expansion is not an accident or a side effect. It is the core feature of a system that functions by borrowing from tomorrow to survive today. Governments develop tools to keep this process invisible. Treasury bonds turn future obligations into present cash. Inflation quietly erodes the value of your savings while shrinking the real cost of government debt. Deficit spending allows politicians to promise prosperity while shifting the burden into the distant future. Currency devaluation gives governments breathing room at the direct expense of every citizen's purchasing power. What began as emergency financing became the default operating system of nations. Citizens adapted to perpetual deficits. Politicians ran on promises funded by money that did not yet exist. Central banks learned to rescue markets with trillions of dollars created in seconds. And society in general became disconnected from the reality that its prosperity hinged on time borrowed, consumed, and permanently unrecoverable. Today, the system behaves like an addiction. Governments are dependent on future monetization. Economies require constant injections of credit to feel stable. Markets panic when interest rates rise even slightly. Every newborn enters the world carrying a share of national debt, often exceeding $100,000 before they take their first breath. This is how completely governments have learned to transform future labor into present liquidity. Part 1 ends here at the moment where the world has fully transitioned into the age of infinite debt, where governments no longer ask, "Can we afford this?" but instead, "How long can we delay the consequences?" The story now shifts from how the system was built to what happens once reality starts catching up. By the time the gold standard died and the world embraced debt as its monetary foundation, the stage was set for a new era of financial dependence. Governments now relied on borrowing to maintain stability, win elections, fund programs, manage crises, and even support markets. The link between real productivity and money creation weakened with each passing year. And once this process accelerated, reversing it became nearly impossible. No major government can meaningfully reduce its debt today without triggering economic shockwaves. Raising taxes angers voters and slows growth. Cutting spending sparks political backlash and destabilizes social programs. Printing new money risks inflation. And controlling inflation requires tightening conditions that crush businesses and households. Even central bank interventions, once seen as precise tools, now function as emergency life support rather than sustainable solutions. Over the past few decades, every attempted fix has produced new problems. Attempts at fiscal discipline collapse when voters demand benefits. Attempts at monetary tightening collapse when markets panic. Attempts at austerity collapse when economies shrink. Attempts at aggressive spending collapse when inflation surges. This cycle repeats across countries, continents, and economic systems because the underlying engine, the monetization of the future, never truly stops. Patterns emerge everywhere. Japan, with a debt-to GDP ratio over 260%, maintains near-zero interest rates because higher rates would trigger an immediate fiscal crisis. The United States borrows more than $1 trillion every few months, simply to maintain governmental operations and service existing obligations. Europe relies on future monetization to support welfare systems built for population structures that no longer exist. China uses hidden layers of shadow debt to maintain rapid urbanization and growth narratives that mask severe structural weaknesses. Globally, the situation becomes increasingly unsustainable. Around 60% of countries are at or near danger levels of indebtedness. Nearly 70% of all circulating money was created after the 2008 financial crisis. A staggering amount of currency, around $1 in 5 US dollars, was created in the year 2020 alone, during the height of worldwide crisis. These numbers are not signs of vibrant financial health. They show a system that requires constant injections of new money just to remain standing. A system where future generations bear the burden of present convenience. A system balanced on the assumption that economic growth will always outpace the cost of debt, a belief repeatedly disproven throughout history. At some point, every financial structure built on borrowing from the future reaches a reckoning. History offers only a small set of outcomes. One path is an inflation avalanche, where money loses purchasing power rapidly and governments are forced into dramatic resets. Another is default, either explicit or disguised, where nations simply cannot repay what they owe. The third possibility is a coordinated global monetary redesign, where currencies, reserves, and financial rules are rewritten. Whichever path emerges first Ordinary citizens will feel the consequences most deeply. Their savings erode, their cost of living rises, their opportunities contract, their wages fail to keep up with the system's demands. Meanwhile, the architects of the system continue to push its limits, hoping the consequences fall far enough into the future that they themselves escape accountability. Three truths remain essential for anyone trying to understand the world they live in. First, modern money is not stored value. It is a claim on future labor. Every unit circulating in the economy represents promises, obligations, and expectations projected into the future. Second, inflation is not a natural force but a deliberate mechanism governments use to minimize the weight of past debts, shifting the burden silently onto citizens. And third, the system's survival depends on public unawareness. Most people never question how deeply their future has been monetized. If they did, trust in the system would erode too quickly for governments to manage. This is the world we inhabit, a world where time itself has become a commodity. A world where decades of future effort are traded away for political convenience today. A world where financial systems consume tomorrow to stabilize yesterday. Every year the gap between reality and illusion widens. Every year the pressure on future generations intensifies. Every year the countdown accelerates. The truth is simple. This system will eventually reach a point where it can no longer sustain itself. The question is no longer if it will break, but when and what the world will look like afterwards. If you want deeper analyses of how global finance truly works, the hidden structures governments never explain, and the patterns behind historic economic shifts, make sure you subscribe, share this video, and stay with the channel. The next investigation reveals what happens when a monetary reset becomes unavoidable and how it will reshape your life in ways most people never see coming.